Diego mo Diego Pederüchü modi hago chükehielie videoga shigetse tie hanye suko puvienie go pekena mo ache Kevisato suko elaborate be nigo tsuro que se ocupe que dizer que me puro visher Sanyü de mo por 27 years teacher me fatenie shinu lavorino Nagaland no vora mo hanye sunu NagaEd no full time keze kam tsawa slano aputik kesa sago kaput sala.
It brings me immense pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for the invitation. I don't speak NagaEd. I've been away for 27 years, as Shiroi was saying, so I've only taken 2 lessons of NagaEd yet. So all I can say is, Chivise, I had a very good lunch. So I'm filled with immense gratitude for the invitation, especially to Ura Academy as a non-NagaEd speaker. And I'll give the rest of my explanation in English as we move forward. So just to give you a brief background on where I come from and the context that I'm coming with. So as Shiroi mentioned, after 27 years living in Australia, I've come back. And the main reason I came back and to found NagaEd is I'm pursuing the answer to a question. And for me, that question is, what is my contribution to my community? And so that's what brings me here. But before I was brought here, I was working in Melbourne at RMIT University. This is the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, and they have about 1 lakh students and about 10,000 staff. In this university, I worked in the management sector, which meant that we were governing and running the administration of the university. The particular area that I was working in was in innovation. So I and a very small team was tasked with finding out what is the future of work and what is the future of education 20, 30, 40 years from now. Because the students we are teaching today, whether in class 10 or doing a bachelor's or doing a master's, they will be in that workforce. They will be living in a world 20, 30, 40 years from today. And so much of my research was organized around that future of work. So when I think about 30 years in the future, I also go 30 years into the past. And so as I was saying, grew up here in Kohima and migrated to Melbourne. In that time that I was growing up, we didn't have a television. I believe I had seen a computer twice. And I think I had touched a computer once. So within a very short span of time, we had to adapt to a very developed world. Things that were very different. I remember my mom, the first time she saw an escalator, she saw one was empty. Oh, these stairs are empty. So she tried to go up, didn't realize it was coming down. Moving stairs. The first time my brother saw a flushing toilet, he was obsessed. Everywhere we went, every restaurant, every house, can I flush the toilet? And see the water come down and disappear. So there were many changes that we had to adjust to. But that wasn't just for us. The world over has gone through 4 industrialized revolutions as we speak. And for our community, we've had to adapt to 4 industrial revolutions in just 1 generation. Meaning which, the way that we were living, or the way that many of us live, through subsistence farming, is the way that the developed world was living 230 years ago. So this is where I have to give acknowledgement and gratitude and give thanks to people here at Ura Academy. Because while the rest of the world took 230 years to adapt their language, to adapt their worldview, over an expanse of generations and generations, the people in this room have had to do it within a generation. And that is an immense amount of work. So I think today we came from an oral language, and I think today if there were students who did not have books, how would we teach them? So we came from an oral language and had to shift and adapt not just the language from oral to a written tradition, but the way that we saw the world and the new things that were coming, so that the language is relevant and the language has a place in the world today. What I'm saying now is that we're on the cusp of another change. And if you can't imagine a student studying today without a textbook, without a written language, imagine how a student 20 years from now will study without digital education, without digital tools. That is the equivalence. So the reason I say this is because large portions of our language is now living in a different place. So I wonder where these stories are being told. So when I find that I identify or resonate with a cultural story, I say that is part of my personal identity. Say, I belong to that cultural identity. And I was very fortunate who had a father who was a historian who told me many stories, aging back to time immemorial, our ancient folk tales, to the struggles that were happening in his lifetime when Konama was burnt down, to what happened when we left. So these stories resonate with me. These stories are part of my personal narrative. What is the interesting thing about this is that a cultural identity, cultural stories are simply a collection of personal narratives that have risen to the top over time. What happens when there is no space for these stories to be told? So we go to the .com boom around the year 2000. And much of the stories that we're telling each other, the way that we interact, the relationships that we make are in the physical world. And you have a tiny dot that we call cyberspace. Things are very different now. In fact, for young people today, for students, much of what they are saying, the stories that they share, the relationships that they build are in the cyberspace. Whether it's on Facebook or WhatsApp or Instagram or Snapchat, wherever it may be, these relationships are real to them. And within this space, a culture is being formed. This space, where we call the cyber physical, is all encompassing. So if you can imagine the difference from the year 2000, 2022, and the amount of space that cyber has taken in terms of where stories are being told and shared. When we move to the year 2040, when we move a couple of decades from now, the majority of all language, the majority of all stories are going to be told in the cyber physical space. And unless our cultural heritage, our folk tales can move into that space, it will be crowded out and remain in this physical world, pure physical world that no longer exists. This cyber physical world is going to be the real world when we move forward. So that asks us, what is our responsibility and what is our response? If you imagine right now that 1 lakh Naga students got up and moved to Delhi, what would our response be? Would we prepare them with values and lessons? Would we teach them how to make sense of the world when they reach Delhi? We might even go there ourselves and set up hostels and care homes if 1 lakh students were there. What I'm saying is 1 lakh students are now in the cyber-physical space. They're now on Facebook, they're now on Instagram, they're now on Twitter. In fact, on average, they spend 2 hours a day in that space. So what is our response? How might we ensure that our language, our values, our cultural heritage thrive in this new world? So we started a digital school. We see this digital school as a gateway between our physical world, where we speak chükehielie, where we have our cultural folk tales, where we have our language and our heritage, and bring them into the cyber world. So that when we move 40 years from now, when we move 30 years from now, there is a space for our values, our folk tales, and our heritage, along with everything else that's going to be existing in the cyber physical world. So we looked at designing our school based on 3 pillars. First, we look at the academics. So we've started digitizing our schools, and Shiroi mentioned we're working with a number of schools now, digitizing the NBSC and the CBSC curriculum, so that that knowledge has a space and is housed somewhere. One thing that we came across is that in this transition over the past 30 years, in this mass upheaval, the mass migration from villages to towns, is that some of the lessons that were taught in the village seem to have lost a place. And we distill that to 2 essential lessons. One is the lessons for living. One is the essential skills. What are the practical skills that we need to live and thrive in this world? Once upon a time, that might be how to plant rice, that might be how to be a carpenter, that might have been how to weave. So what are the essential skills for the world today? Secondly, we look at lessons for living. How are we contributing citizens of our global community, our village, and our family? And we call those lessons for living. So this is really that we have that once in a generation opportunity to bring what we have had, a culture since time immemorial, and bring that into a new world. Just as we took an oral language and turned it into a written form over these past 30 years. So when we talk about skills of the future or work of the future, I don't have to paint a picture of an imaginary future. It is happening today. So the world's largest companies today don't own anything physical. They exchange information. So let's look at Airbnb. Airbnb is the world's largest accommodation company. They do not own a single house or a hotel. All they do is exchange information between a customer and a host. The world's largest taxi company, Uber, does not own a single taxi. They have no physical inventory. They facilitate the exchange between a driver and a passenger. If we look at Amazon, Amazon is the world's largest store. It does not have a single shop. They do is exchange the information and facilitate that exchange between the customer and their clients. So the world is being changed immensely. And what we've done is identified 35 drivers of change. We might look at this as mass migration, automation, AI, climate change, an aging population. And when you mix and meld these drivers, they create certain conditions in the world that we live in today. One of the conditions that we can leverage on significantly is what we call the free agent. So this is a mixture of the knowledge worker, automation, cloud technology. These conditions have created a free agent, meaning that especially accelerated over the past couple of years. People are working in companies, working from home, and working for companies all over the world. So my cousin Vipule works in a software company. He's an IT consultant. He works in Melbourne, but he can work anywhere in the world. My cousin nephew lives in Connemara. He's a photographer, but with his internet connection, he's making connections all over the world and working that. So the barriers that once existed, the lack of physical infrastructure, is not as great a barrier as it is for us as it was for our parents. This is something that we can leverage, because with the lack of physical infrastructure here, we can still work for a company in the US, UK, and bring some of those jobs and revenue back to our community. So today, almost half of all jobs are automated. And when we're looking forward, we're looking at the majority of jobs being automated. So to prepare a generation for a new way of working, we must adapt ourselves and identify what skills we need to be relevant employees and workers in this world. So in this world, knowledge workers are integral, meaning that the most highly prized is people with analytical knowledge and people who have essential skills. These are skills that artificial intelligence cannot be replaced. And this will be key in terms of the work that we are going to be doing moving forward. These are skills of sense making. How do we make sense of the world around us? How do we provide meaning? These are skills of social intelligence. As we mentioned, that much of our interaction is, for young people, already happening on WhatsApp or Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat, wherever it might be happening, and that will increase tremendously. So giving somebody a handshake, a hug, these social cues are going to become more difficult, meaning which creating social relationships and having social intelligence becomes paramount. Novel and adaptive thinking, cross-cultural competency, working with people from other cultures in a much shrinking world. No longer an Australian is just going to work with an Australian, or an American just working with an American, or Naga just work with a Naga. Computational. The key thing about these skills is it's something that we have been practicing and performing for a whole generation. Making sense of the world. Throughout the tremendous change that has happened in the past 30 years, through the conflicts and through the violence, we have had to make sense of the world. This is a key skill that we have. Social intelligence. Nagas are some of the most socially intelligent people I know. We read cues naturally. Cross-cultural competency. We already have within us 16, 17 tribes, let alone the myriad of other interactions that we have. So these skills are things that we are already practicing. Things that we can leverage off. What we need to do and what we're working towards is creating the technical skills. The technical skills of IT engineering, software development, these hybrid skills, when we take our natural born assets and things that we have been practicing, with the technical skills that the world needs, these are the jobs are growing twice as fast. These are the jobs that are paying 20, 30, 40% higher than normal jobs. So it is an intersection of technology, business, and design where we need to form our skills to thrive in the world that is being created and developed. What I'm glad to say is that there are many people helping us along the way. So we've set up an advisory council of people here, overseas, and people who are coming across to help set up our digital school. We're partnering with school educations here in Kohima and Dimapur, Northfield, Measure, Ardenan, Vineyard, El Shaddai, and speaking to many, many more. We've gone out and reached out to many organizations, whether it's the Department of Education, Consult for Humanity, Central Square Foundation, which is India's largest education think tank. What we're here today is we're asking and we're inviting you to help us build the digital maroon for the next generation. This is something that we cannot do on our own. And so we invite you to join us. So whether after this or later on you want to come up and you want to say hello to myself and Shiroi, if you are from a school or an education background, or you have some skills you'd like to share, we'd very much like to hear from you. So thank you so much, and thank you for having me here today. So we might take some questions. Shiroi, do you want to come?
Onye pejese, hakro leba motozugo, mom hakesa sego, several kepusen elmo, hakro popoaz midim hakro gets Navarro, Mori, Kikimiri, onye company, Kikimiri joins a la, she's a boy gets on the magic gets a 3 training goi Kasavas, that's where Hako gets on the magic gets a city. Kihu gets a 3 You got J has or a microphone 7 years to see.
Ura Academy company NagaEd jadi matsu dolera Pederüchü bunu Ura Academy me video gitu hego taroset lagi vichabo momo
Hugo, I think a few weeks back, phone severe Ura Academy what's a sedino Hugo Kamgo pusses a Hacker Kranu GD alignment buckets and Willie Kirkilapuna Haneri house de gets a ro uvie values ko cultural values Diego. Sugo pezza holi ketulanu mukim hiri hakosh digitize vodoshi shida ngo ke se upwa ke zake mi hyochiri kerts vojezo deri hapo keniro che NHS parba ketzo deri tsunurim hake kramising ba deri samhono I mean NHS no bakemo ho values ho shidi course corporate creates a leviro sukoriche ngos kezelinum hatsili kevi mori for example just a small example ro chedot mike karite ni dia learn tsunamaya deri vodinu course haidi vodinu lesaki bonu zomoshe tsazuba ketsuko ri vodinu hadu learn tsuna sezabaya slanu suko course ko boritsili vidomoga basic English speaking muhyo hero demonstration nu tsvenyo board so de deri chidi course upette projects bukets se video lesson gori pette mu grades gori platform bonu khasile ke vichaba slanu sukonuri mhaho ke ziri tsleviro ngo sukori ke puli ke vichaba di pus de you want to add something more?
I am a group because I did that. Our objective is to promote DEJ, not only within our community, but also around the world. No. And here, one of our problem is we have not achieved or come across those basic studies at the research level to make it into digitalized. So that one thing is auto-translation, either from English or to, English to Dignity or Dignity to English. That is one aspect that we're aiming for. Number two, what you have said is deeply impressed me, because naturally we are living in a blessed land. We have so many natural providence, like medicinal plants, and our language is a classificatory language, where in English it is not describable. Every language has such a kind of features. So if we put those into English, then somehow our journey to promote in the process of globalization is easier. Is easier.
Yeah.
The day before yesterday, I come across from YouTube under this global Naga forum. Mehdi and Mizo had been make it into global forum. That is one very good information to that. And especially for our younger generation, if you have some expertise in the computer, then probably it will not be difficult for us to make it our language a global language. That is one wish that I just want to put it in front of you, so that those will become the sources of educational teaching also materials.
Thank you.
You know, Kevisato is the son of one of my friends, Sanyü, whose mother is a Mizo. He has got an advantage of bilingual. I do not know whether you can still speak Mizo or not.
Thank you so much for your questions, Uncle. I don't speak Mizo. My native language is English, but I'm slowly taking Dignity lessons. I think I'm on lesson 2, so I'm doing po kenye se Dieu. So slowly I'll get there. But exactly to your point, what would be tremendous would be for us to make the language and available and accessible on a digital scale. So if you ask, even for yourself, you're watching a video on YouTube. Many students today, if you ask them, where do you go to learn something? They'll say, I go to YouTube. Where do you go to learn the guitar? Where do you go to learn the piano? Where do you go to solve a problem? Majority of them will go to YouTube. So in this space, we're asking, can we put Tengidie? In this space where most people are going and spending their time, how do we put Tengidie there? And so one thing that I think Shiroi has mentioned is that during my time at RMIT University, we took some of the best tools, platforms, and resources. I was very lucky enough to work with some brilliant learning designers, digital learning designers, and I said, I have a problem. I want to build a digital platform. I want to teach digital education tools in Nagaland. Can you help me? And they came with open arms. So we worked over 8-9 months with learning designers and teachers from Australia to bring world's best practices to our community here. So exactly as you were saying, there are lots of tools and platforms we can utilize, and what we want to do is be able to take some of our language, our culture, our folk tales, and put them in a place where young people and the next generation are spending their time.
Theo mayo at sana getso liro chado mi ho Udemy Marie course era haidi online site ko bonu liro vodi physical college nuvo mozori distance learning nuri pette digital tselevide slalo ungori tiozo diploma course kori chado physical exams vor khaselirvi there is sokori digitized sali viro test ko khasazori mori videos ko moholivi seshi text sokori pette digitized sibe course kori chedo online nungo so tselegi vi thabala ketslande suri povie opportunity poba kets sule Yes, definitely. Yeah. Your expertise roteni diemone. So what we'll do is we'll provide the digital platform, and Ura Academy can design how you want the course to be. So you can give your videos, you can give your, your notes, you can give your content. We will help you digitize it. We are the experts in that, and you can give us the content. So definitely possible.
Ketso kedo sama me.